is correct that the situation is more dire now in 2024 with even Albert Street happening. It would be disturbing that nothing became of iChip, which would have forewarned a Usindiso or 80 Albert Street coming. You share that view?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it certainly is disturbing. As I said, I can't say that nothing happened. There was some TEA.
No, on that hypothesis, Prof, I'm not saying you're saying it. I'm very specific. If it proves to be correct that nothing happened, that would be disturbing.
Yes.
You share that view with me?
I share that view,
Okay.
yes.
Right. We will certainly be asking the relevant witnesses from the city to help us understand to what could be the hurdles if it didn't get implemented, or if it got implemented, with which sections of that got implemented, etc. I don't want to probe those issues with you, Prof. Now, I just want to go back to your statement and try and explore the recommendations you make, and to see whether or not some of them can be implemented with adjustments, maybe. All right. Firstly, you would accept, Prof, that things like free basic services have to them an eligibility criterion.
Which specific eligibility criteria?
Like you should be a South African citizen to start with.
I wouldn't accept that a minimum level of basic access to water should only be provided, for instance, to South African citizens. I would think that the Constitution, when it says, I can't cite the specific passage, but I think that there would be a legal ground for the provision of basic services even to non-citizens.
No. Section 27(1)(c), which is where I think you are going of the Constitution, says everyone.
Yeah.
But surely what I'm trying to say is that given, what this free basic services specifically stipulates is that there are eligibility criteria. For instance, I can't have free basic services for the income threshold I'm at. You accept that?
I'll take
You take my word for it. Okay, sure. And I think, in fairness, that is what may contribute to a confusion. The criteria for eligibility tend to, and for maybe understandable reasons, I'm not saying they are legitimate reasons by themselves, has citizenship as a criterion. They have requirements like having a salary slip, as you said, or a banking details, or a meter connection, etc., all of which are not available or accessible to undocumented foreign nationals. You'd accept that?
I accept that, yeah.
Right. Now, I think the difficult spaces would be some of these unlawfully occupied buildings would, per definition, not be able to comply with the requirements of registration, etc. You accept that?
I accept that, but that was the reason why I proposed a place-based response and not necessarily at a household level, because if you have a building where there are both South Africans and foreign nationals, I think that one can explore, for instance, basic fire safety is not at a household level. We're not speaking about individual eligibility. We're speaking about improving the fire safety of the place as a collective. And that was part of the reason why I propose a place-based response, which is improving fire safety at a collective level, not necessarily water at a household level, for instance.
No.
You know?
I'll get to those, Professor. I'm just trying to be specific so that the record is not unduly muddled. We know which aspect we're discussing at a particular point. For now, I'm talking free basic services.
Okay.
I'm saying there may be sympathy to a position that says it is difficult to give free basic services in a dwelling like a multi-story building that is unlawfully occupied. And some of those who are unlawfully occupying it are also undocumented foreigners, foreign nationals. And I say I'm not wanting to be insensitive. I'm just trying to see whether or not there are recommendations which the Commission can make which are implementable, not ideal, but implementable. You concede there would be those practical difficulties, perhaps, even though the idea is good.
I think that there may be some, particularly if it's, for instance, the registration of individual households. I would think that at the level of the building as a whole, for instance, ensuring at least access to fire, water, hydrants, and so on.
I'll get to those, Professor.
Okay.
I'll go to the other departments of fire hydrants and others. I'm just talking supply of water and electricity, which is a free basic service.
Potentially at a household level, there are difficulties. Also, one thing I would, free basic services is part of what we're talking about, but also the potential of giving certain buildings access to paid services. Some of these buildings, for instance, like CB House, I just would, in the book, I put call it the station, but I've now unanonymized because the residents are no longer there. For instance, wanted to pay for services and had difficulties connecting. So I think that there's two levels of this. One is free basic services. One is just actually access to being able to pay for services.
For now, I want to limit myself to free basic services. I'm suggesting to you, and I'm not being ad hominem. I can say that to a professor. I'm not being personal about this.
No, I totally understand that. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm just saying there may be difficulties in a multi-story building occupied by unlawful occupants for very diverse and good reasons why they are there. But the implementation of a free basic service within the confines of its description may be difficult to implement. Would you accept that?
I would accept that it's difficult but not impossible.
Not impossible, no. I suspect because it wants to measure what is free to a tenant, it would have to have a meter, and if it is water, it would be 20 liters per room, not per 8 floors, because then you'll have others who are using 40 liters, 60 liters, and the others nothing. I mean, it's just a practical, common sense analysis. Would you share that?
Yeah, I accept it's difficult.
It is difficult, yeah. But let us try to deal with the recommendations as you have them, recommendations as you have it. My document is not paginated, but can I go to the very, very last one you mentioned against paragraph 74.7? You make the point that there is a lack of coordination, which I think as evidence leaders we agree. There appears to be efforts and conducts that are somewhat in a silo. It's either you're in EMS or you're in JPD, or, we share that preferably a recommendation that there must be a coordination of these efforts. How do you conceive that platform, that coordination rather?
I left it open-ended because I feel maybe the commission would be best suited to recommend what would be appropriate, whether it's nested within the city or an external platform. Certainly speaking as a researcher and from my engagement with civil society, often I've come back to this process of participatory engagement, and I think civil society has often felt like the ICF that they haven't been engaged, and there's not an established platform. I think as academics also the routes to feed research back to the city in a focused way has often not been clear of how that research can impact. And as I said, the solution needs a wide variety of technical skills and dialogue, between civil society, the city, technical skills, and so on. So it could well be that there is one department within the city, for instance, that is tasked with dealing with that, but that also might create problems with issues around neutrality, particularly if there are legal cases within the city. So it might be that another institution is more fitting to host that, or to at least ensure that research pilot projects at those types of conversations, but that they have a clear channel into policy and so on. I mean, the universities are potentially one space, but it would have to be something with, again, a clear way in which that knowledge generated can be can have direct practical implications.
Yeah, I hazard a fear that if it is a platform that's informal, it would have no teeth. ICF, as we have it now, already has what it believes to be an interaction with city officials, but clearly inadequate and inoperable in many respects, they would tell us. That's why I'm trying to have the benefit of your insight or thinking on the point. It would seem to me that that type of platform would have to have a statutory base to it, so that it can be a legal instrument that people can use with accountability if part of the fiscus is going to be used in running it, right?
I would agree, because that's part of the the difficulty around research participatory processes is that they don't have teeth or an implementable. I've not done specific research on them, but again, one might look at other cities. I know Sao Paulo, for instance, had institutionalized participatory processes where that were nested in the city, but that engaged a variety of actors. I can't speak in depth to it at the moment. I haven't prepared that, but I think it might also be valuable to look at what other cities and the ways in which those participatory processes have been institutionalized. Because I think that's part of the problem, is that there may be participatory processes, but they don't have, to use your words, and I totally agree, any teeth to actually make sure that that engagement has a direct shaping of policy. And so I think those precedents could be explored.
I'm trying to explore your patience with us, that you, when you have the time, think something through on how one institutionalizes this type of interchange between those affected and the city. Please share those with us.
Of course, I'd be happy to look at some of and share if possible within time constraints.
And then, if we go in order of reverse ascendancy, we get to paragraph 74.6 of your recommendation. There you're saying intervention should be gender sensitive to attend to the particular risks faced by women in the building to violence, along with disability sensitive, in that communities living with disability face particular risks when it comes to accident and fire. Again, I can't see anybody finding fault with that as a proposition. I must ask though, what child initiatives are you having in mind? Some of the buildings we went to where we saw children in conditions very less favorable even for their own health were there, but I couldn't see surrounding facilities, and that's why I'm asking, what do you have in mind about this childcare initiatives, about gender sensitive initiatives maybe, and disability sensitive measures? What do you have in mind there, Prof?
I mean, I think specifically that maybe I can deal with it one point at a time. I mean, I think, and I'm sure you've witnessed this, many, you know, there are children in these buildings, often, and I imagine, exposed to accidents, running around and so on, and often without access to childcare, daycare, and so on. So, I mean, that's going beyond the ambit of a narrow focus on the households, but I certainly think that there could be potentialities for childcare initiatives, and there are some in the city, but you know, that are either sponsored by the state or even supported by private sector, but to ensure that children growing up in these type of spaces have early childhood development, decent spaces, because I think that will serve a dual role, both of early childhood development, but also of safety, that one doesn't have unaccompanied. As I said, many precarious workers, you know, don't have easy access to childcare, which are these support networks. So those type of targeted, more kind of social developmental initiatives, which aren't specifically about fire safety as such or safety, but I think do serve a, you know, a kind of dual role. You know, I think this issue of the particular risks faced to women, I think that is again, it's not an issue in itself of what I haven't spoken to, but like the issue of safely lit passageways, for instance, you know, if women have to walk in the dark or dark passageways, that is itself an exposure. Issues of you know, potentially chemical toilets or access to toilets. You know, in CB House, people have to walk in the dark across public spaces. Those are. I mean, this links to, it's not specific to unlawful occupations, but wider projects. I think the, you know, I mean, I do think that even building good relationships between communities and police is possible. And again, I think there's very low levels of trust, but that if there, you know, for instance, in Diamond Exchange, where there were cases of sexual violence, often the police wouldn't even enter the buildings when they were called, you know. So generally improving safety in the spaces, I think is, you know, so that if there are cases of gender-based violence or other forms of violence, people actually do have access to police protection. So I don't have a single solution, but I think that kind of gendered element is particularly significant on various levels.
Now we'll get to the area of your evidence about trauma that the blitz and raids do. I'll get there. For now, I'm trying to secure something with sufficient specificity that if the commission makes a recommendation, as you have in 74.6, it would greatly assist if we know what are gender-sensitive initiatives, if we know what are child care initiatives. It may be something you want to ponder a little while, and if you have something to add, you can tell us.
I mean, the one most obvious is making sure that in any participatory engagement, there's representation by women in these platforms to speak about their specific risks, what they're facing. I think representation is an important issue. I think platforms like the ICF have a number of women leaders in the organization already, but I don't think that these decisions should just be made by like a man like me speaking. I think that again it comes back to those participatory initiatives.
Yeah, I'm trying to have a little holistic understanding of your recommendations. For instance, if that platform we spoke about earlier were to be instituted, surely there would be women there who bring their voice to that platform and create solutions that are gender sensitive. Am I going along with you in that thinking?
I agree with you.
Okay. And you have under 74.5 that there should be an expansion of harm reduction programs and counseling support to deal with drug use and addiction. I can understand that. Socio-psycho assistance to those who require it and cannot afford it, it seems to impel in other provisions of the Constitution that should be provided. It is the word expansion that I'm trying to explore. In what manner do you say that could be done?
Well, there are, I think SANC has an inner city office of rehabilitation. There have been the exploration of providing harm reduction. I mean, harm reduction. I think there have been discussions around providing methadone for opiate use at government clinics. But I think part of the issue is that if one again has targeted programs that deal with levels of addiction, particularly in Nyaope is a major issue, which is a kind of low-grade heroin. So I think opiate addiction is a very serious risk. But I think the problem is potentially, with large-scale raids or targeting them, if you criminalize, users, and I'm not speaking about the actual dealers or the syndicates involved, but criminalizing the users, that again further marginalize people. So again, I think there's spaces for more targeted harm reduction interventions to help particularly youth get off opiates, but also to channel them into productive activities, kind of actual employment and livelihood opportunities. I think there's a lot of hopelessness in the inner city, and pain, hopelessness are a cause of addiction. It's not just a physical response. So again, I think it's again going beyond the ambit of the commission, but I think it speaks to my general approach, which is having a more socially sensitive developmental approach to dealing with these issues. Because if you can, deal with issues of addiction, then you can also deal with the kind of broader, the networks of gangs that form around, and violence does form around often the distribution of narcotics.
Yeah. No, I think my effort is really intended to find if you have programs that are specific, because addiction, there should be state departments responsible for that as a problem. Not that it doesn't exist in the problem buildings. I'm not making that point. I was just trying to explore with you, if you know how they can be expanded, we would benefit from your insight.
I think if you have spaces which are more, you create that deeper engagement with communities, and you can have more kind of outreach that actually reaches out to people in these spaces, and allows them a pathway into rehabilitation rather than programs which alienate or criminalize drug users.
No, I can relate to what you say, Prof. Against paragraph 74.4, you say policing interventions should be targeted at criminal syndicates profiteering from the illegal rental of buildings. and not indiscriminately target poor inner city residents. Policing responses should also aim to protect vulnerable residents. I can't see anybody who quarrels with you about that as a proposition.
Maybe not, but I mean, as we've discussed, large-scale raids have been a major way in which we've dealt with the problem of so-called hijacked buildings, which there was the industrial house case, but it has been used as a mechanism to deal with a response. So I'm also, I hope things change and we have more targeted, supported policing responses.
No, I agree with you, Prof. That's why I'm saying it would be hard to see anybody quarreling with that as a proposition. The questions become, how does one target them? Because the counter side of that coin, and you're correct in that view as well, that it can be pretty traumatizing to see police just pitch up unannounced at a building. You don't know whether it is about any particular purpose, lawful or otherwise. I can understand that. I'm just trying to posit with you some of difficult spaces. And let me use this as an example. Part A1 of this commission's work concluded that 80 Albert Street or Usindiso was an act of arson. Now that is criminality beyond any contradiction. You accept that?
I accept that.
And it is those type of things that, and I'm not justifying any traumatizing of people. I'm just saying I want to posit certain practical complications around some of these things. You go to a building with 600 occupants, 10 of them are criminal, and you want to deal with those. There is an unfortunate but an inevitability that it would be traumatizing for those who are innocent in the building. That follows without design. Am I correct?
If there's a kind of blanket raid on rooms, yes, rather than something which is targeted based on intelligence, based on...
No, I'm giving you exact hypothesis. I'm saying if intelligence reveals there are these people who are dealing in drugs in this building and they are a threat even to the inhabitants of the building, I'm just saying arrival of police there would be traumatizing, but it may very well be a consequence, unfortunate, that results. I'm not purveying that police should have, as you use the word, blanket. I'm not advocating for that.
It may be, of course, but that's very different from a family with kids not under suspicion at all, having their room raided, their door knocked down, which I think is far more traumatizing,
No, you're quite correct, Prof. I'm not going to advocate or advance a case that innocent people in the operations of this nature should be traumatized. I'm not advocating for that. I just want us to find a language that would make it clear that you are also not advocating that raids are in themselves not a tool to be used to where properly indicated. You accept that, right?
I accept that.
Okay. Then you tell us in the other recommendation against paragraph 74.3 that the city, in collaboration with the provincial and national government and potentially civil society and the private sector, should explore solution and funding possibilities for the in situ upgrading of unlawful occupations, at the very minimum, improve fire safety, access to basic services, and security. Again, I say, I can't see why a collaboration within these three spheres of government should not happen. So what we should be looking into is, if it happens, and as you say, the in situ upgrading of those unlawful occupations, what do you have in mind there?
I mean, in situ upgrading can be a variety of different interventions, from very basic interventions to retrofitting and turning a building into a decent residence, you know, and that you'd have to, you know, there need to be architectural, you know, architects and engineers consulted. I don't have that expertise.
Yeah.
But just to give a few quite basic concrete examples, I mean, one would be fire escapes. You know, if there is a damaged fire escape, to repair fire escapes, so that there are routes of access, you know, things which are actually in the bylaws that you outlined in the first part of the commission. Having proper fire doors, for instance, you know, so that there can be escape. If there are shacks which are blocking fire exits, you know, moving them, you know, to other parts of the building in a way that there are clear fire exits. Replacing very flammable materials, you know, plywood, hardboard, you know, forms of plastic and so on, with less flammable materials, you know. So again, these need, I'm speaking now as a non-specialist, but I'm just saying that there seem to me types of basic interventions that can be made to make buildings safer. I come back to the basic point that there has to be community buy-in to these. You know what I mean? I've seen fire escapes where the metal was taken for recycling. So there's no, you know, one has to have community buy-in and community protection of those resources, to at least, so that if these interventions are done, they're not just undone for recycling markets or vandalized or so on. But I genuinely think that, you know, again, I'm coming back to some of the key points. If there's proper fire training, if there's community buy-in to protect, you know, the fire exits, things which will make the building safer, that's possible. So it needs I'm coming back to the same point, but it needs a technical intervention, but it also needs a community-based intervention and buying to protect those resources.
I have a very deep appreciation of what you say, and I mean no disrespect. It's just that at a certain point, generalities give an escape route for those who must do something.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put it as tight as I can. And I'm also can put it to you that the commission will hear that some of the financial provisions made by National to the city here, even of amounts like 10 million, go back to Treasury unspent. But I'll engage somebody else about that. But you don't have in mind what in situ upgrading you're referring to. You're referring to those type of monies that can be used to fix what can be fixed.
Yeah, you know, as I said, you know, to repair, which is one issue where there have been existing infrastructures, and to potentially think about retrofitting or incremental improvements in certain cases where it's possible to actually develop some of these buildings into more habitable conditions. Of course, if it's more expensive, it would need planning permission and so on, which would require the buy-in of the owners. You know, but if there are city buildings, then those types of interventions could be considered as options. Again, I've seen it in Sao Paulo, where unlawful occupations have been upgraded by residents in collaboration with city, but also engineers and so on. So it's not impossible, but it's difficult. Those more extensive. But But at the very basis, what I'm talking about is a kind of just improving the basic infrastructure to avoid further accident.
Yeah. Now, for instance, our section 26 of the Constitution regarding to social housing is what lawyers typically call a third generation right, i.e. it is enforceable subject to resources availability. So in fixing all of these things, we still must submit to the budgetary constraints that the council here would make about its budgetary priorities. Am I right?
Yeah, I agree that, but as we've discussed, and you know, I think there should be explorations of how not just municipal but national funding could be mobilized. For instance, the UISP is geared towards in situ upgrading or incremental upgrading of informal settlements, but hasn't been applied to inner city buildings. So it's not entirely clear to me why, but I think that those mechanisms should be considered too.
Well, I'm sure some of them would be concerned about qualified audits if they're using money sensibly for one purpose not indicated in the budget. But I'm saying it's something that also must be sensitive to the constraints that a state has.
And of course, I mean, there needs to be a form of triage, a form of prioritization of resources.
Right.
But and this is what I really appreciate with this commission, I think preventing further tragedies like Albert Street is a very high social priority when we think about budgeting. Correct.
So you say against paragraph 74.2, renewed efforts to address the structural causes of unlawful occupations are required, in particular the expansion of affordable accommodation to low-income households in the inner city. To this, I had your evidence to say there is a shortfall of stock available for accommodating low-cost housing in the inner city. Am I right?
Yeah, and that again was established by ICHIP and the basis for ICHIP. So I don't think that's something new. I think that's something that's been broadly recognized by the city. I think the question is around what's happened and the implementation.
Yeah, the point I'm making is, again, this is not controversial. What may require further elucidation is what you conceive as expansion. Is there room for an expansion?
You mean?
I recognize the need, I recognize the duty, I recognize the obligations imposed on municipalities in terms of the law. I recognize all of that. My difficulty is, to that is attached a very operative phrase in section 26 that within the means available to the state.
Well, I think that would, again, I can't answer that, like exactly how many buildings available, but it would be the onus to identify unused city properties that could be developed, potential land and so on. So, I can't answer technically what's available. That would have to be.
No, I also don't think I have.
Dealing with the safety of the building, dealing with the safety of the building.
An attempt to deal with a building with foreigners and South Africans in a discriminatory way. You're not going there.
No, I think that's what I'm saying. It should be a place based in a non-discriminatory way.
And there's no evidence that it was ever done in a discriminatory way.
Well, I don't think that the improvements have really, the attempt to improve conditions have really taken place. So
no, I'm talking fire, Prof. Let's limit ourselves to what you're talking about.
Okay.
I'm saying with fire, for instance, it is not possible to be discriminatory about to whose protection those measures would be